China, there is a fundamental question at stake for Europe. How can Europe remain globally competitive when trust is eroding between governments, between companies, and between citizens? At the same time, technological and geopolitical fragmentation is accelerating. I'm thrilled to be able to discuss this challenging and timely question with a very distinguished panel. Please welcome Konstantinos Bikas, the former ambassador and head of Greek National Intelligence Service. He's now International Business Director at Metlen Energy and Metals. To my right, Mariana Bozesan. She's an AI pioneer, a successful serial entrepreneur, and an award-winning technology investor, as well as a member of the Club of Rome. Welcome, Mariana. And to my left, Stαύρος Δρακουλαράκος. Almost made it. He's the Director of Communications for Europe for Philip Morris International. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished panel. Let me start off with you, Konstantinos. In Europe, we're looking both at internal divisions as well as at external threats. What does it take for Europe to build and protect its technological base?
Okay. That's a difficult question, but the answer, I think, is more difficult than the question. Indeed. Europe has been successful, extremely successful, for what it was created to do. After the Second World War, no more wars in Europe, no Holocaust, all this, Europe managed to do it. But as Europe grew into that successfully, the challenges became bigger, and also the ambitions for Europe became bigger. In that sense, and trying to fix that, Europe created its own constitution, though we don't call it constitution. And allow me to stress here that one of the reasons that in France and the Netherlands the plebiscite of 2005 failed because it spoke about a European constitution and about a European national anthem. So Europe nevertheless has a constitution. These are the treaties of the European Union and the treaties of the functioning of the European Union. And these treaties give us the framework where Europe stands and what Europe can do. Europe is not a federal state. At the same time, this is very clear. So Europe does not have a defense. In the United States, there is the chief of the army, of the armed forces, and decides, let's strike here, let's do that. In Europe, this is a competence, it's a national competence. Even the foreign policy is a national competence within the European Union. And this cannot change because some people would want it to change. This is one thing. The second thing is that even though Europe created a single market, Europe did not manage to do a capital markets union, for example. This is very important because capital markets union mobilizes funds and resources for competitiveness, for energy, for all these things. To give you an example to understand that very clearly, in the United States has a capital markets union. The amounts of money that the United States can put into markets, put into enterprises, put into new companies, cannot compare. It's 5-6 times more than the one that Europe has. Not because Europe does not have the money, but this money stays, in a way, captivated in deposits that are low-yield deposits. Europeans don't want to invest in the capital markets. Europeans want to have deposits that give them 1%. So we have 30 billion sitting, 30 trillion sitting in deposits in European banks that do not produce the energy that they do in the United States. This cannot change because even though capital union could be without a change in the treaties, none of the states wants that to do because that would mean allocation, different allocation of capitals. Money from Greece will go to Finland, money from Finland will come to Greece, and every state is afraid of taking this step. And then in Europe, we have energy that is much more expensive than in the United States, not to mention China. So I don't want to take more time. I think that 5 minutes are off. But this creates an environment where volition and will do not suffice. We need to find small cooperations, and we need to avoid ideology and setting tasks that we cannot perform. We should not say Europe should do this, Europe should do that, because the citizens of Europe Europe is a European Union is very democratic in that, have to follow. When the citizens do not follow, as for example happened with the green transition, the citizens want the green transition, but if when they asked, they were not asked, you will pay so much for the green transition. And then if the money is not enough, societies always do wild things. That we know. In Metlen, we're working in more than 40 countries all around the world. We're working with rare earths, with gallium, with aluminum, and we have a sense of the industry, a sense of people working in the industry. If Europe is not realistic about keeping jobs and creating wealth, citizens will go to the extremes of the political spectrum. And I think nobody wants that.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Let me bring in Mariana. Mariana, in your book, The Making of Consciousness Leaders in Business, you argue that the real bottleneck of transformation is not capital or resources, but it's consciousness. How did you arrive at this conclusion, and what does it mean very specifically for Europe today?
Thank you for the wonderful question. I would like to invite everyone to ask themselves why the lack of trust is showing up in the world right now. And ask yourself individual, when do you miss trusting people? What happens in you? It is fear, isn't it? Right? So you're fearful of something. And this is what's currently dominating in the world today. And it comes from an egocentric mindset, meaning me, my ego is in fear. And that creates a win-lose mentality, which is what we're currently having because people are relying that if they win, somebody has to lose. And consciousness is the force that helps us later understand that consciousness evolves from an egocentric me, like a 2-year-old, mama, buy me this, to an ethnocentric mindset, like a teenager. And we all know kids, even if we didn't have any, where we need to be integrated in a tribe, a tribal mentality, which is MAGA, for instance, Make America Great. But I am coming from the perspective of the world, which means in the face, and you mentioned that I'm a member of the Club of Rome, in the face of planetary threats. And the fact that out of the 9 planetary boundaries, who is familiar with the term planetary boundaries? This is the operating system of the planet. In order for us to survive on this planet, we need, just like on a computer, you cannot put water on a computer, we need certain boundaries that must not be crossed. Mm-hmm. And out of the 7, which, climate change being just one, water flows and so on, biodiversity, we have crossed 7 of them. So the planet can no longer sustain life. So we need to take, and Artemis reminded us, we need to take a world view of the problems that we have today. We cannot continue to have an egocentric, fearful mindset. We need to look at solutions. And in my case, I'm a technology investor. I studied artificial intelligence 40 years ago, as you said. And I've been looking for ways to aggregate the capital. You just mentioned that there is so much capital on the planet today. In Europe, why doesn't it get invested in what needs to be invested? And the answer to that is because people are fearful. They want to make more money out of the money that exists. And this doesn't have to do with their low level of mindset. It has to do with the fact that they are responsible to a fiduciary responsibility. They go to prison if they don't. So we have to make it very attractive. And
so, Mariana, just to follow up on this, how do we overcome this fear? We spoke about the Capital Markets Union, which many see as a crucial step in order to advance Europe. We also talk about defense system integration, for example, but there is fear. Their states are holding on to their national interests. How can we overcome this fear and move towards more inner European trust?
And this is exactly what Europe stands for, and this is what I was going to respond to. We have the opportunity to make more money by investing in the right things. Let me give you an example. 90% of the CO2 emissions that have busting in the atmosphere all the time can be aggregated with technology that exists today in 3 sectors of the economy. Number 1, energy. The energy technology in wind and solar and so on, and Germany has tried to implement it but didn't quite succeed. So we have failed to build the renewable energy infrastructure. But there is fusion reactors. There is all kinds of technologies that we can, and Europe is leading, which brings us to the fact that we are in a wonderfully placed space in Europe to make more money by investing in the right thing. The second technology and industry is food security. Precision fermentation is, for instance, one solution. Cellular agriculture, all the agricultural, developing new fertilizers using quantum technology to ensure food security. And the third is mobility, as we call it in German, or transportation. So 90% of the CO2 emission can be reduced from the atmosphere through the technology that we exist today, and we can make more money. That's where capital goes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Stavros, you work for Philip Morris, a tobacco company, which is responsible for many health costs around the world. So speaking of trust and creating value, how does your company manage to contribute value to the European economy?
Thank you for this question. If I may say, I'm not here just as a colleague working in Philip Morris International. I'm also here as a Greek and as a European. So, you know, it's a threefold hat that I'm currently wearing. I really appreciate the diversity of this panel. We heard the hard facts on what is happening and perhaps some deeper why is this happening in Europe. So if you'll allow me a couple of remarks and observations. First things first, I don't think that Europeans are fearful. I think, and I don't think they lack trust towards the European Union. Actually, I was just reading this morning that according to the latest Euromonitor, trust at the EU is at its highest level. It's at 48%, but it's at its highest level. And I was trying to understand why, and I think one of the main reasons is that Europe wasn't built. It's not a romantic project. It's a shield. It's something that we Europeans build to defend us. And we see that when a crisis hits. We saw it in COVID. We saw it, well, the rare earth minerals, which is a crisis. We saw it in energy crisis. We see it now with SAFE in defense. My point here is that Europe can act and is acting. But sometimes, for example, the conversation that we're having, which is about competitiveness, we see that as a battle that starts, is being given, and it ends. And the issue with competitiveness is that it doesn't stop, contrary to the previous examples that I mentioned. It doesn't stop. It's a change in motion. It's something that you need to continually be doing, obviously setting targets in 10, 20, 30 years ago, but you know, tomorrow starts today, so it needs to start getting built today. So again, I say that as a member of the EU, proud member of the EU, as a Greek, but also as a company that is deeply rooted in the business sector of the EU. There's this Mario Draghi bingo. I don't know if you heard about it in big fora. How many times is the Mario Draghi report going to be mentioned? And I'm happy that I'm the first one to do it on this panel. So we know the Mario Draghi report that came out almost a year and a half ago. And we know that needs to be done. But only 10% of it has been done. So what are the elements that we lack? Number one, as I've said, is the fact that we don't treat competitiveness as something that should be ongoing, innovative, with investment, with improvements, with amendments. But also there's another area. The Mario Draghi report showcased that there is a gap in innovation, there is a structural gap in investment, as you very rightly said, but there's also a third area, that regulation, as it currently exists in the European Union, is a type of taxation. Hear me out. It's a type of taxation because it doesn't allow for innovation, it doesn't allow for commercialization, it doesn't allow for investment, and then all that erodes trust. So I think that's also an area worth sharing.
I'd love to follow up with you, Konstantinos, on the topic of regulation, but you still haven't answered my questions. There was, how can a tobacco company contribute value when it's actually responsible for health costs substantially?
Absolutely. Yeah. Here's the thing. The way we see it is that we all accept the difficult externalities and the damage that cigarettes cause. So our aim here is to move to new, innovative, better products that advocate for harm reduction, so that are less harmful. And in that way, we've introduced about 10 years ago with lots of investment. The last 15 years, we have invested about $16 billion overall, and in the European Union, we have about we have created 289 billion of economic footprint. What we're trying to do is to move cigarette smokers to less harmful alternatives. Now, as it happens, a couple of days ago, our quarterly results were announced, and I'm happy to share that the model is working. Right now, more than 43% of our revenues are coming from these products. Many European markets are embracing these products and this principle. I think Greece is a very good example. So this is what we're here to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Konstantinos, let's come back to the topic of regulation. It's one of the most frequently addressed pain points when it comes to the European Union. Has Europe gone too far with its regulations? Has it suffocated innovation in Europe?
Well, actually, I have the answer right here. Bloomberg 2 days ago. Bloomberg, Siemens warns EU's AI rules will deter investment in Europe. And Siemens says that we will prioritize Siemens artificial intelligence investments in the US and China if the European Union doesn't adapt its restrictive regulations. That's the answer. The problems that the European Union faces, at a part, are ideological. If Europe pollutes the world, the planet, 7%, and has a CO2 tax that China doesn't have, and the United States have to quite a lesser extent, and then natural gas is more expensive, electricity is more expensive, taxation is more expensive, regulation is more expensive, and we want to be competitive, I'm afraid this cannot be done.
Well, but on the other hand, you have a lot of concern when it comes to data security, when it comes to the implications of unregulated AI, and the EU is on the forefront of creating these kinds of protections for its citizens.
I think that what you say pinpoints the problem. There are some things to do right or wrong, and in the planet, a part decides to do the right thing. If the rest of the planet decides not to do the same, or that, which we call the right thing, then there is a problem in competitiveness, whether we like it or not, because these are the true facts. BASF moved the factory from Germany to China. This is a bad thing. We, as Metlen, have an aluminium industry that produced profits last year, more than 200 million net profits, because we're vertical. In Europe, most of the aluminium smelters closed because the energy is too much. When the smelters close and the people are unhappy and the people don't like it, you have things happening in societies, and I don't want to go back to the past to say it, from the French Revolution onwards. You have to have the people with you. And in order to have the people with you, they have to have jobs and to be able to feed themselves, their kids, and see a future for them. If this doesn't happen, ideology will not help. These are not easy things, are very strong facts, but we have to compare. Let's leave China on the side. But if we compare the situation with the United States once again, when you have capital markets, funds can go to companies without an interest rate. When you take from the bank, a company gets from the bank, you pay interest rate. The gap between the funds that US can forward to the market and Greece and Europe can forward to the market are enormous. These gaps cannot be, why they cannot be fixed? Because in Europe, We don't have the sense of identity that the United States. Europe gives 1% of its GDP for the federal budget. The United States gives 15 to 20% of the GDP to the federal budget. That means that there is not an envelope. In common agricultural policy, there is an envelope. Every 7 years they say, that's what France will get, that's what Greece will get. But in the United States, if someone doesn't have work in Oklahoma, money will go to Oklahoma. They will go to Nebraska. This is not because Europeans are bad or Europeans are stupid, but Europeans don't have the same sense of common identity that the United States have.
I'd love to come back to the question of identity, but let me bring in Mariana, because I think she might disagree with you on the question of regulation. Mariana, is EU regulation ideological, and how can Europe manage to marry regulation and its standards and values that it stands for?
Yes, the answer is yes. The European regulation is ideological, and I agree. And if we go into the details as to why we are strangling ourselves, it has to do with the lack of willingness to look into the depth of what is actually happening. What does AI mean? I remember when meeting Vivian Reding, when she was proudly telling me that she cooperated to build this AI regulation, and I went into the details, like what exactly does it entail? And the lack of knowledge of the fact, what does artificial intelligence actually mean? How does it work? How is it applied? What does it mean in terms of the application in the making the transformation feasible? Then my experience, and I don't want to put that on Vivian. In Europe, we are somewhat so fearful, coming back to what you said, a lack of trust, that we don't even open up to go into the details, to learn about it. We should not kid ourselves. The United States is having the same lack of a job, the same problems that we're having here. Yes, there is more capital going into the transformation, but the artificial intelligence threat, the quantum physics, the transformation, using quantum physics in making the transformation to the next, whatever it is, the next level, we need to develop it, feasible, is actually going to happen there faster. So they're going to fall faster than we are, and they're going to develop faster because of the regulation. So for instance, we all heard, they're bypassing regulations and building data centers into space, right? So that they can run their artificial intelligence, which they are using to make the transformation feasible. So they're bypassing the same problem that we have with maybe black instead of white or green or whatever, but they do have that. And so this is what the conversation that I'd like all of us to engage in. How can we really go into the details? For instance, and you mentioned the Chinese and the United States models, artificial intelligence. They have put their values into those models at the time of training the models, right? We have failed in building foundational models in artificial intelligence, which means oh my God, great European values, and here we are in Delphi, the true, the good, and the beautiful, which is the foundation of my book, in terms of strategy. How have we implemented our values in those AIs? It's non-existent. So we need to go into the opportunities that we have today. How can we build systems at the edge using the foundational models that exist so that we can develop the technologies? I know this is very abstract. Let me give you an example. We have failed to build renewable energy infrastructure in Europe and in Germany, and I really fought for it. I worked with the German government to bring the UNPRI into the German government, to adoption of the impact investing, but the capital is not waiting today for a new ESG metrics in order to get invested. We failed at that. So the next paradigm that must come online to ensure abundance, you talked about ensuring jobs and capital, is fusion reactors, is energy, freedom, and security. And in order to develop those, and we have the wonderful Proxima fusion, in which I'm lucky enough to be invested in Germany, out of Germany. All the technology that I can talk about here is from Europe. In order to develop fusion energy and make energy available, cheap energy available in Europe, we need quantum physics, we need quantum information science, artificial intelligence applied, with quantum technology in order to develop the materials so that we are able to create the fusion reactors, new materials. The next application is in ensuring the food security, because the planet is not waiting. And I didn't mention the time. We only have 10 to 15 years to go back to safe planetary boundaries. So we must find a way, bypassing the regulations, to answer your question, and use the technology that is available, including artificial intelligence, in order to get there, together with the United States and the rest of the world.
Stavros, when you look at technological development and dependencies that Europe has created for itself, depending on, in crucial sectors, on other countries, do you get the feeling that Europe has missed a window, or do you see perspectives like Mariana has just illustrated them?
How much time do we have?
Little, so briefly.
All right. Let me start off by saying that I don't think we should bypass regulation. I think we should have the right regulation. We should have a regulation that's fit for purpose, yes. Right? So because we need regulation. It just needs to be risk proportionate, it needs to be realistic, and definitely not based on ideology. Every time there's a conversation on technology and the latest, I will not call it a trend because it's definitely here to stay, I always go back into, let's say, the founder in terms of academics of innovation, Clayton Christensen, the Harvard professor that had the innovator's dilemma. And one of the points that he accepted is that innovation comes first, regulation follows. This is how it works. And it sometimes plays catch-up, as we see, for example, with AI, especially in the US. Here's the thing. Sometimes in Europe, we put the carriage in front of the horse. So we put the regulation first, and then we expect the innovation to happen within that. And I'm sorry, but that doesn't work. So these are my remarks that I want to share before going there. Of course, Europe has dependencies. I think there's two ways to see that. There's the positive way, because this means we're more open, we're more collaborative, we're less ideological. At the same time, it means we're more dependent in the bad sense. I think what we have seen, especially during the past year and a half, Europe may not have an army, but it has a very, very strong economy. It has wealthy nations. It has a very strong GDP, accumulated GDP, that it can leverage. We've seen that in many battles. There haven't been just 2 wars in the past year and a half. There have been more. Battles where the stronger financial player essentially dictated the terms. And I think Europe can leverage that more. So that's my answer to your question.
Konstantinos, you have a strong background in security. When you look at the challenges that Europe is facing today, are you more concerned about the threats from the outside or from the inside of Europe?
From the threats from the inside. From the inside, because we see that the world is moving very fast. Competitiveness is very important to keep jobs. And when we lose competitiveness, we're losing security. There is a very strong connection between competitiveness and security. If we look back at history, this connection, if it's not kept, bad things happen to societies. But I don't want to sound as an anti-European, not at all, or as a pessimist. In Europe, we have to understand not only the elites, but also people in the media and the elites have to work with that to understand how Europe functions and what can Europe do. Maybe coalition of the willing to do some things that other countries don't want to do. But the fact that Draghi report is so often quoted is because he put the problem he put his finger in the core of the problem. We have to be competitive. If we are not competitive, this becomes a security problem.
Exactly.
But Draghi also called for more levels of integration. So do you see that as the right path forward?
Yes, but if I believe that in a very in a very cautious way, because Draghi knows the competencies of the Union, knows the competencies of the states, so he doesn't cross this border. Draghi says this should happen. It's not the job of Mr. Draghi, Dr. Draghi, of any politician to make this. We need people to come along. And this is very hard as Europe functions today, because, as I repeat and I repeat it because it has to be understood, some competencies lie outside of the competencies of the Central European Union. There, Europe has to show flexibility. Draghi uses this word, flexibility, innovation in finding ways to work together, and definitely less ideology. We cannot afford to lose competitiveness because of ideology. This is not seen immediately, but in the medium to long term, it's a vital security threat for Europe. AI, Europe is very low in AI progress, but AI needs electricity. If 40% of the cost of AI is electricity, if electricity is 3 or 4 times more expensive in Europe than in China or in the United States, then AI will go there.
I understand, but coming back to the recommendations that both Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta have made, their call is Europe will be more competitive if it becomes more integrated and has a stronger internal market, for example.
Yes, but this is something that the Commission cannot decide, because it's not their competence. And people in the European Union, the Portuguese, the Greeks, the Finns, the Germans, the Dutch, they don't have the sense of unity as in the United States or as in China. This is a difficulty here. We need to be competitive, we need to put our forces together, but each one looks at the other and says, okay, you put your money first and then I'll come later. That's why banking union has not been complemented. That's why energy union has not been complemented. It's not because people are stupid, because each part of Europe, through history and through the way societies move, and societies move slowly. We have not found the accelerator of societies. And this is the core of the problem. So we're running around this problem, which cannot be solved in a way, with a sword. We have to work around the problem in fast ways, easy ways, intelligent ways, some groups of Europe moving together, and without ideology. I do not think that there are easy solutions on that.
Mm-hmm. Stavros, you said you're here as a Greek and as a European. Yes, Konstantinos has put a question mark on a United States of Europe, which has been voiced as a vision by some leaders. Are you confident that the EU member states can move towards a stronger European identity while, of course, keeping their own heritage and national identities?
In one word, yes. And in many more words, there are certain things that need to happen. I think we're moving towards that direction. I believe a lot that, of course, if we look at the snapshot of right now, there are many battles that we're losing, but I'm pretty sure there are many battles that we as Europeans are winning. They're very good case studies, very good examples of industries. We keep looking at the brightest and let's say latest industry that comes along. We didn't discuss AI 2 years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. So if we look also at the traditional sector that is hurting, and I want to mention that, like the automotive sector, like the energy sector, sometimes, to move forward, we need to look back and make sure that we have the right regulation, the right type of investment, the right type of people and of talent. Because at the end of the day, it is about people. It is about the European talent, which is at the top level, not only in terms of academics, but also in terms of wanting to stay in Europe. So definitely, yes, but with a sense of urgency, with a clarity and prioritization.
Mariana, to close up with you, since we're in Greece, in your work, you went back to Plato to find inspiration for how to lead Europe to prosperity. Can you enlighten us? What wisdom does Plato give us to lead Europe towards prosperity?
Thank you. I think the most important question is not just, we talked about the what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And I think the most important thing that Plato addresses, who does it? know thyself. And this is what the inspiration I got from Plato, because I'm a scientist, but I grew up very poor in communist Romania. When I ended up at Stanford and I was able to have a company have an IPO, I ended up in a discrepancy between philanthropy on one hand, which is the lover of people, a Greek word, and capital. So how do you integrate capital with philanthropy, with the culture, and with the social, and with the planet? And I looked for a model, and of course, Plato's the true...
And ideally, if I may say, without bureaucracy, if we can.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if you invest your own money, you can do with it what you like. So that's another privilege that I have. But I think this is the most important thing, because capital is always limited. And those who are fearful of investing in capital, they need to find better ways to de-risk. And so you need to look at who is doing what is doing with your money. And the Platonic values, the true, the good, and the beautiful, which I call the consciousness, is the best de-risking factor that we have. So look deeper at the people, because that ensures the culture, ensures the social application, ensures the planet. So that's basically the inspiration that I got from Delphi, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much. This concludes our panel, and I think it's done a great job in highlighting the discrepancies that we see in our inner European debate on how to advance Europe. I'm sure this will continue in many other discussions in and off the stage here in Delphi. Thank you so much.
Could I say another word? Just 2 seconds.
Sure.
Let's look at the numbers. Numbers tell us if we're doing right or wrong. When we see the difference between what the others do and what we do, we have a warning light. If we don't look at the numbers and we just say words, we're lost.
So we will look at the philosophers as well as the numbers and at the European spirit. So with that in mind, thank you so much, Konstantinos Bikas, Mariana Bozesan, and Stavros Drakularakos. Thank you very much for attending, and the program will continue shortly.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no break. The next session will start immediately.